Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this election campaign special live stream. Many topics to talk about this evening. We don't have a guest, so I'll have more chance to get to your comments and questions as well. Do fire those in. That's always an interesting part of the live stream. But where should we start this evening? Let's start with my pictures. Right, that's where I was this afternoon. I went over to East Kilbride. There's David Richardson, our candidate in East Kilbride. With a big placard they had made, vote with your conscience. That's a good placard, isn't it? That's the Family Party's message very strongly. So it was an interesting afternoon in East Kilbride chatting to people. It was interesting how many people saw David and said, oh yeah, I've seen your leaflet, I've seen you on the leaflet. So that was good. A taxi driver came along and said, can I take some leaflets to put in the back of my taxi so people can take one if they want one? That was great. Something else interesting as well. This happened a couple of times now when I've been out and about. As people say, oh, I saw you on the telly. Because it's funny. I mean, we think our slots on the BBC, I mean, it is absolutely minimal. I don't think many people watch the 9 do they, and you get like 15 seconds on reporting Scotland. So it feels like very little. But it's surprising how many people have seen it. And people recognize you and they're familiar with the Family Party from it. So that's interesting. It's quite encouraging as well. The other thing I'd say as well is that chatting to people today, I've found this in other places as well, quite common when you go out and chat to people in the street, is it's quite remarkable how many people there are basically with mental health problems. So many people, you start chatting and before too long you realize, you know, that they're sort of off the normal spectrum, shall we say. And I say the number of people like that, it's quite remarkable. I suppose this is during the daytime. I don't know, but I find this in other places as well. I don't know how the statistics are playing out, but yeah, there are a lot of people struggling with life with various reasons around Scotland. Yep. So it was good to meet people today. David's been doing a street stroll afternoon after afternoon in East Kilbride, so that's great. Just on the subject of David's campaign as well. For our candidates, we have a leaflet delivered by Royal Mail. The law is that Royal Mail have to deliver a leaflet for every candidate free of charge if the candidate wants to provide them with one. So all of our candidates have done that, but mine hasn't arrived at my house. David was saying his hasn't arrived at his house. Talking to another one of our candidates, he was saying his hasn't arrived at his house either. I mean, it really does seem as if Royal Mail's delivery of these leaflets is pretty patchy. Let's put it that way. I don't know why that is. At the Scottish election, we gave Royal Mail a list of 100 addresses that hadn't received a leaflet they should have done. But what did they do with that complaint? Nothing. No action taken. No follow-up in any way. I guess Royal Mail don't know. They don't know where they're all the way down the chain. They don't know what's been delivered and what hasn't. So again, the suspicion is being aroused that these leaflets we pay for, £12,000, how many of them actually get to where they're going? I don't really know. I don't think Royal Mail really know. I think some postmen might do a bit of editing en route. I don't know. Quite frustrating, but we'll see. We'll see if mine arrives after all. If you're in a constituency where there's a Family Party candidate, and if by the time of the election you haven't had a leaflet, you're certain you haven't had a leaflet from the Scottish Family Party, let us know. Send us your address and let us know, or we'll maybe compile another complaint to Royal Mail. So that was this afternoon. A few other things been going on. Did you see this story? This is Taylor Swift, obviously, and she's been welcomed by a royal family. John Swinney, band outside Buckingham Palace, playing one of her songs or something, and yet she'd got her crowd chanting "F the patriarchy" in London the other night. I mean, what is going on there? I really wish some people would be more discerning about who they will praise or pay their money to or whatever. I think there's plenty about Taylor Swift's views, lyrics, etc. in the past that would give me severe doubts about whether I wanted to support her, whether I like the music or not. But to be doing that with an audience, I mean, for a start, there's the language. So all these kiddies going along, and she's urging them to chant obscenities. And then there's the message as well, a sort of hardline anti-men, battle of the sexes sort of mentality, F the patriarchy. mean, is that really what we should have sort of been honouring? Is that giving a free pass in Scotland? I think often superstars, okay, they're superstars for a reason because they're very talented and people like to go and pay money to hear what they do. Okay, that's absolutely fine. But in terms of the messages they deliver, then, well, we need to be very cautious about that, I think. Right, but right, Alejandro got Phil's leap to the Morningside. That's good because Phil hasn't got it, so that's a start. They've gone to. We know some have gone out because you get responses. You get like snotty emails and sort of hate mail, and you get positive responses as well. So some have gone through. Right, Rob, we've got them today from all the parties. Okay, yeah, that's interesting because at my house, I haven't had one from any of the parties. So maybe we're going to get them in a job lot sometime coming soon. We shall see. But the thing is, some people have already voted by now. Postal votes have already gone in. So these were delivered to Royal Mail on the 17th of June, which is over a week and a day ago now. And if they're not being delivered till now, I say they've missed the postal votes. Now, for the SNP and for Labour, does that really matter? Not really. Everyone knows who Labour are. Everyone knows who the SNP are. They've been seeing them on the telly all the time. But for us, that leaflet might be the only thing that informs people that we're standing or alerts them to what we're all about. So for us, it's much more important. Right, I made a video or two about John Swinney's appearance at Edinburgh Pride this year. I thought that picture sums it up quite nicely. I mean, it's a strange situation, isn't it? That the First Minister, year after year, whoever the First Minister is, they want to go and associate themselves with this event. So we've got the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence there again, etc., etc. But John Swinney seems to have no qualms at all of saying, this is my tribe. These are the people that I am at home with. These are the people whose values are the values of Scotland. That's what John Swinney was saying. The values of these people are the values of Scotland. The other thing he said is that nothing's ever going to change that. Really. I mean, that's quite an extreme thing to say, isn't it? It's not just, that's what we think. It's just nothing could possibly change the view of Scotland, by which he means the SNP government. So I made videos about what was going on there. That's business as usual from the SNP and the other parties as well, mainly as well. That's John Swinney again with his big end conversion practices banner. I was on a Zoom call just before this live stream speaking to some a church. The church leader invited me to go onto a Zoom call to speak to members of the church. And one of the things I spoke to them about was the conversion practice ban, because it really is turkeys voting for Christmas, particularly church leaders, people with traditional socially conservative views about sexuality. They're basically voting to criminalize themselves. And it's coming. I mean, we're going to have a Labour government UK. They've committed to a full conversion therapy ban. We'll get one in Scotland too. So, yeah, with the cases will start flowing soon enough. And hopefully that will help some people to wake up and just realize what is going on in this regard. Because LGBT activists saying they want religious people, that's the document, people in religious contexts, they want it stamping out. People trying to help people on the basis of that. So John Swinney, though, you see, he stands there with that. But you don't think he might have thought, this is a bit risky. There's an awful lot of people in Scotland who actually don't go along with this sort of LGBT pride philosophy. There's an awful lot of people who don't go along with that. Am I not risking losing their votes? Is that what he's thinking? I don't think he is. So I'll tell you why he doesn't think that. Because I think the mainstream parties have learned that social conservatives, maybe not the Muslims, but certainly the Christians, they've learned that you can contradict them in any way you like. You can say their values are horrible and appalling. We need to move on from them. But don't worry, they'll vote for you in any case. That's the lesson that they've learned. And sadly, it seems to be, to a significant degree, it seems to be the right lesson. Because they might get letters and people might speak to them. But when it comes to election day, don't worry, they'll vote for you. Anyway, I mean, John Swinney should have thought to himself, oh, right, if I go on this banner, I might lose me quite a few votes in the election. If I basically say you want a lot of like Christian pastors locking up, that's going to be a vote loser. But I imagine it didn't even cross John Swinney's mind. But let's make him lose lots of votes and then maybe it will. Right, this was a little thing came across this week. Marriage rates in Hungary rose by 92% between 2010 and 2020, while marriage rates declined nearly everywhere else in the West. Okay, so marriage rates increased dramatically in Hungary. Why did they do that? Because of their pro-family policies, their pro-marriage policies. So in a sense, Hungary has put into place policies of the same type that the Scottish Family Party commends. Not like the same in every detail, but it's the same sort of philosophy they put into practice. And the message is, the evidence is that it works. Because Hungary is a country where the population was set to decline extremely dramatically. Hungary didn't particularly want to go down the mass immigration route, so they decided they wanted to keep immigration at a fairly low level and to have a self-sustaining population. So they've really spent a lot of money and made a lot of effort to bring that into being. So the policies have been successful. Have they got the fertility rate up to the level where the population will be self-sustaining? No, but they've made a very significant difference. Now, will that difference become more and more marked as the culture changes? We can hope so. I'm sure they're hoping so, but we'll have to see how the future unfolds. I've been talking about this a bit recently, because you've got parties like Reform saying, well, all the parties, Labour and Conservative, they're all saying, we're going to slash immigration, cut immigration dramatically. I mean, our policies, we're very cautious about immigration as well. But on the other hand, if you don't want the nation to disappear, then you need to have, alongside that, you need to have policies to boost fertility. Right, this is my little table of calculations I made based on Scotland's total fertility rate at the moment, which is 1.28. So in the green column there, this is projecting that there are some approximations in here. This is not the most sophisticated type of calculation, but it's it's a reasonable ballpark figure we're getting from this. So current population 5.5 million. 50 years time, it would half. Population of Scotland will half. 100 years time, population of Scotland will be below 400,000. So below the population of Edinburgh. 200 years time, population of Scotland 22,000. It's like less than the population of the Western Isles. So Scotland would be basically wasteland. It will be uninhabited. It wouldn't be able to govern itself or defend itself. It will become a wasteland, basically. Now they're the figures with no immigration at all. Because last year there were over 1.2 million people came to live in Britain, and 670,000 people were born here. So almost twice as many people came to live here as were born here. That's how dramatic the population issue is. Now, in the right-hand column, just for interest, I adjusted the fertility rate to take out abortion, because going on 1 in 3 pregnancies, certainly more than 1 in 4, end in abortion. So if you take that out of it and create a new fertility rate in the absence of abortion, you see it makes a very dramatic increase. Population obviously is still declining, but at a much, much slower rate. Right. Do I think Reform will gain a Scottish seat in this election? No chance. No, not even close. No, they've got no chance to get an MP in Scotland. Right. John Swinney was given the impression when he took over as the new moderate SNP leader, but now seems to be doubling down on their virtue signalling. Yes, I would agree with that. He tried to present himself as pretty sort of middle of the roads, didn't he? And I would think, in an election campaign, I thought maybe they might have just backed off the pride thing a little bit. Remember, the parties didn't pridify their logos for Pride Month this year because it's election campaign. But John Swinney obviously had no qualms about still going along to the event itself. Right, let's see what else we've got going here. Right, just going back a bit. The patriarchy doesn't exist, made up by activists and NGOs to push an anti-family agenda. I would be inclined to agree. The idea that there's like a sort of conspiracy of men to oppress women in society at the moment, this needs to be overthrown. I mean, it's totally fictitious. I mean, people talk a lot about conspiracy theories these days. Okay, there's some pretty wacky conspiracy theories on the right wing of politics, but there's some pretty wacky conspiracy theories on the left wing as well. And the idea that there's such a thing as the patriarchy, that society is structured to oppress women and benefit men is just a wacky conspiracy theory. But sadly, it's absolutely mainstream. Okay, how about a little video at this stage? I'll turn the sound off. You might have seen this on social media. This is from Inverness, a primary school in Inverness. This is their pride display, obviously made by the pupils. Each thing on the bunting, each flag on the bunting made by a pupil. And that is a primary school. How about that? Now, got quite a bit of traction on social media. People were quite shocked to see this. I mean, it is shocking. It is shocking, but I suppose it's not shocking in the sense that this is just government policy. The government policy has been to have LGBT inclusive education since about 2018. So from nursery up to the end of high school, there's to be LGBT content explicitly in the lessons. So the school is just following the government's guidance. It's as simple as that. So generations of children in Scotland have been brought up with this ideology and taught that it's the one true truth, and that anyone who doesn't go along with it, well, they're sort of bad people. Is it working? This indoctrination, is it working? Well, partly. You've probably heard me say this before. My rough impression is it sort of seems to work with the girls. With boys, by the time you get to teenage boys, they're often not so keen. They're quite rebellious, but fed up with the whole thing. So maybe there's some hope in that. Right, primary school in Inverness not have a trans head teacher. I hadn't heard of that one. There is John Naples Campbell, the cross-dressing man who I've made videos about. He is the head teacher of a school in the Highlands, at the far north of the Highlands now. In fact, we'll be releasing a video about that soon, because someone from the family party actually ended up going into their school library and looked at one of the books that was there, and it is absolutely shocking. Now, I've looked at quite a bit of appalling sex education material in my time, as you know, but this book it's maybe the worst I've ever seen, actually. This is from a school library. So John Naples Campbell seems to see the school as just a medium for him to promote his own ideology to the pupils. So we'll have a video out on that very soon, but it is, I say, extremely shocking what's in that book. But that might be another. I'd be interested to hear about the other one, if there's a trans head teacher in a primary school. We've got like non-binary teachers in primary school. There's one in Edinburgh, I know, where the pupils, well, there's certainly in some cases in Scotland, pupils have been punished for calling it's obviously a female teacher, for calling a miss something when it should be mix or whatever. Yes, we've been familiar with that one. Okay, she left, did she? Okay, well, maybe she's gone up to the Highlands, become a head teacher. Who knows? Who knows? Okay, what else have we got? That was a topic I wanted to talk about a bit tonight. I mean, Nigel Farage got into hot water for his comments about Russia. So I thought I'd talk a little bit about that. That's an interesting topic. Now, what did he say? Well, he said a few things, actually. He said that the West provoked Russia into invading Ukraine. And he also said that basically he was saying that he thought the West gave them an excuse, gave Putin an excuse to invade Ukraine. Now, I think those two things are very, very different. If you say someone gave you an excuse, then that means, well, that implies that actually it wasn't the real reason, but they were able to claim it was the reason. So that's a much less controversial thing to say. To say that they were provoked into it, well, that's a bit more content in that comment, isn't it? Because that implies that the actions of Western nations were wrong and were likely to lead to, justified in leading to the invasion. Now, Russia is an interesting country, very interesting history. Because not so long ago, it was the USSR, which is effective as a huge empire. Russia itself is a huge empire. In the imperial era, countries like Britain built up an empire by sailing overseas and building up an empire all over the world. Russia didn't do that. Russia just kept expanding its own home territory, generally to the east and to the south as well. And in the 300 years before the Russian Revolution in 1917, listen to this statistic, it's quite amazing. In the 300 years up to 1917, the Russian Empire, in other words, Russia, expanded by 50 square miles a day. It expanded by an average of 50 square miles a day over a 300-year period. So Russia is an enormous empire. Now, once upon a time, Kiev was the capital of Russia as well. So for a Russian nationalist, the idea that Kiev is now in a different country, that Ukraine is a different country, that's quite an affront to their sense of history and national identity. If you imagine Scotland became independent, and then in 20 or 30 years' time, someone took over as UK Prime Minister who was quite the British nationalist, they would really like Scotland to come back into the United Kingdom. They'd like it to be back the way it was. And if they're a sort of decent person, that they would just say, oh, we'd really like it. But if you're Putin, if Putin says, we're one people, we're brothers, then that's time to worry, because he's about to invade you, possibly, which is a different approach entirely. So how do the West provoke them? I mean, EU expansion. Sometimes when people talk about EU expansion, Nigel Farage included, they talk about it as though like EU's invading nation after nation. No, it's just countries that are choosing to join the European Union. I mean, it's not a sort of military force. It's not a threat to anyone. It's just countries that happen to be next door to Russia can choose to join whatever unions and alliances they want to. Russia hasn't got a veto on whether or not countries join the EU because they happen to be close to Russia. I mean, does Putin really worry that NATO is about to attack Russia? I mean, really, I don't think it's credible that is what he's thinking. But what it is credible to think is that Russia is quite keen to invade other territory. I mean, 2008, South Ossetia. I mean, basically, Russia just invaded it and took it. Now, in the olden days, when a strong country invades a weaker one, it just did it. I mean, that's just the way it was. We're strong, you're weak, we've won, you're slaves, tough luck. And that was the way of the world. Whereas now, that's sort of frowned upon. So when someone wants to invade someone else's territory, they always have to have an excuse. It's because it used to be ours, or because the people there, some of them would prefer to be part of our country, or they speak this language. So there's always an excuse rather than straightforward, we're invading. So, but Putin basically invaded South Ossetia in 2008. There are Russian troops in Transnistria, which is part of Moldova. And it's a complicated story, but it's not too far off the truth to say they're basically occupying it, and Russia's sort of trying to take over that. It's between Moldova and Ukraine. So if Russia had taken all of Ukraine, then Transnistria obviously could have been joined onto that and become part of Greater Russia. I mean, Russia invaded Crimea 2014, and then Ukraine. And so the general picture is that Putin is keen to find a pretext to invade a bit of territory of another country. So to suggest the West actually provoked him, I think is wrong. Maybe Putin used that as an excuse, but to say that's provoking, no, I think that is out of order. Now, there are some people on the right of politics in Britain and maybe particularly in America who are a little bit pro-Putin. So why is that? Well, there's a number of reasons. I think some of them think basically he's a European Christian. So that's sort of on our wavelength. Some people might think, he's white. So he's sort of on our side. Some people look at him and think, well, he's a nationalist, he's a patriot. Knows how to inspire pride in the Russian nation. They can admire that. So, okay, fair enough. He's a social conservative. I mean, you hear him talking about transgenderism or family life or whatever. I mean, he's spot on. He's great. Really good. But it's a big error to think because I agree with him about what he says about this, that means I'm likely to agree with him on other things. I mean, that doesn't follow logically at all. I guess that's what's called the halo effect, where when someone likes one thing about someone, they tend to like everything about them. So people who might like Putin's approach to some social issues, they'll also be likely to say, oh, well, he's probably not too far wrong then about Ukraine. But the halo effect is a logical fallacy, effectively, but it can be quite powerful. The other effect I think you can get with some people is they can just say, whatever the mainstream's saying, I have to say the opposite. Now, I've heard lots of people saying, whatever the BBC says, I believe the opposite. And I'd say that's a good joke. but it's not a good philosophy to base your actual beliefs on. Because if you're just, there's some people who just believe whatever the mainstream says, and that's it, end of story. There's other people who just believe whatever the opposite of the mainstream is, end of story. But ideally, obviously, we need to be assessing each issue on its own merits. The other thing with Putin as well, look at his mates. I mean, North Korea, China, I mean, they're pretty, Iran, pretty rum bunch on this. So I think Nigel Farage got that one wrong. Now, some people's reaction to it has been totally over the top, like John Swinney saying he's a traitor, I think. But I do think what he said was wrong. And I think it reflected this slightly pro-Putin element or influence within the right in Europe and particularly in America. And I think it is misguided, let's put it that way. Hopefully what I've explained there was reasonably nuanced and covered the bases. Okay. Which is the most cultured country on earth? I would like to go, maybe not just at the moment, but it's probably one of the two countries I'm keen to go to that I haven't been to. That is Russia and Japan. Yeah, I think it would be a fascinating place to go to. But I think in Russia, what you'd see on, most beautiful place in Russia is one thing. I think the way people live, that they're often living in what they call commie blocks. It's pretty rudimentary, utilitarian, dull, drab, poor quality housing. So I think everyday life for a lot of Russians maybe isn't brilliant, but it's got a lot of fascinating history and culture. I absolutely agree. Russia is the only Christian country left in Europe. I would disagree with that quite strongly. I don't know what evidence you could have for saying Russia was a Christian country. I mean, Putin plays the Christian card, of course. But if you look at other things he says, I mean, the one that always sticks in mind, he says Russian prostitutes are the best in the world. Now, you can go to the Orthodox service and dip yourself in an icy lake in an Orthodox ritual as much as you like. But if you go around things saying Russian prostitutes are the best in the world, I mean, I'll say to people, don't bother trying to convince me that you're a Christian. I think he has a cozy relationship with the Orthodox Church, but I think that's less than ideal. Right, let's move on. Well, this was quite staggering. I just saw this just before we came online. So this is the election date betting scandal. A few conservative insiders, if you like, seem to have bet on the election date, obviously with inside information. And it seems like one of them was Alistair Jack, who's currently, what was the Scottish Secretary, was an MP in the south of Scotland. I just think but there's two elements to it. First of all, it's dishonest, isn't it? It's simply dishonest. You would hope anyone in politics, you might have the idea, oh, I know when the election's going to be. I could go and place a bet on it. Then the next thought should be, but that's wrong, so I won't. But let's say you haven't got the moral compass and your conscience doesn't work, or you're in the habit of ignoring it. So you'll then think, actually, I know it's wrong, but I'm going to do it in any case. So I'm now winner £500 or £2,000, whatever. I'll go and place the bet. This then should be something that says to you, hang on, this is the stupidest plan ever, because it's really obvious I'm someone who would be in a position to have inside information about this. Even if you haven't got inside information, people are going to think that you have. So it's partly wrong, but it's just partly so stupid as well. So this is, there's a Labour representative as well embroiled in it as well, but it's just staggering. And it comes back to a point I've mentioned several times before, just the ethical standards among politicians seem pretty low. And I would say during their selection processes, what part does it play in them? I would say it seems like virtually nothing. They probably trawl through their social media to see if they've said anything, offensive, but do they tell the truth? Do they take things that are not theirs? Do they bet on things when they're actually cheating? Do they cheat in gambling? I mean, how are those issues assessed in the selection process? And my guess is they're not assessed at all, because they don't really think they're that important. And probably the people setting the tests maybe don't think that's particularly important either. So, quite remarkable that he's done that. I mean, just to think that you're going to risk your whole career and your reputation for the sake of a few £100. Absolutely bizarre. But there we are. That's the end of my slides. I've got another little video to show you now. This video is from a Conservative MSP, and when we've watched it, I'm going to talk about the Labour Party's manifesto a little bit. But what do you make of this?
To the Coalition for Racial Equality and Rights, underemployment affects black and minority ethnic communities, with underemployment severely contributing to the growing proportion of families in work poverty. Therefore, I ask the Minister, what is the Scottish Government doing to ensure that high quality and secure work is made available for people from the black and minority ethnic backgrounds?
How about that then? That's the Conservatives. And the Labour Party in their manifesto, in other words, the way the country is going to be run in a week and a bit's time, they say they're going to make every larger company, medium larger company, publish their race pay data. So they're going to say, how much do white people get paid on average? How much do Asian people get paid on average? How much do African people get paid on average, etc.? So they're going to publish the data. So why publish it? Well, the whole point of publishing it, obviously, is people can then look at it and say, your company is racist because you're not paying this group of people as much as this group of people. What are you going to do about it? Now, this already happens with gender pay gap data as well. So what does it do in companies? So a company is thinking, okay, here's our pay gap data for gender or for race. They're thinking, right, we need to promote someone to a new job. Right, if we promote this person, what's that going to do to our pay gap? That's going to make it worse. So we better promote this person instead. And people will start to realize pretty quickly, they'll know what's happening. Don't even bother applying for the job because it's always going to go to a person of the right race and the right sex. And that is a really dangerous road to go down. It's dangerous with sex, partly because it erodes the efficiency of the company. If they're not appointing the best people to the jobs, it creates resentment among men, particularly young men. I think a lot of young men are getting pretty fed up with this because they're realizing at every point they're disadvantaged. Not because of some mystical matriarchy, but because of some quite open system where they're saying they've got to close their pay gap, so they've got to try and appoint more women to the higher positions. Now, generally, women can tend to be less ambitious, less willing to move to a different part of the country for their work. They don't want to work as long hours, etc., etc. So just generally, because of these natural effects, it will, in some companies, it will tend to be that men on average will earn more. But the government says, no, that's a problem you've got to solve. But then you apply that to race. I mean, where does that end up? I mean, it's pretty scary. I mean, in some companies, for example, sort of Chinese, ethnically Chinese people, I think in Britain in general, ethnically Chinese people, East Asians, they earn more than white people on average. That's the fact of the matter. So do they want countries to start sorting that, companies to start sorting that out? So if you're running some like computer software company, if it tends to be, of your top employers are Chinese, have you got to like start promoting some different people instead? Is that really a positive vision for the future? It's just a recipe for resentment and racial tension. And yet the Labour Party, well, it's just their philosophy. It's their social justice philosophy, as they call it. The idea is, where there's a difference between groups in society, the government's job is to eliminate that difference so that every group comes out the same. The social engineering beginning to end. So the Labour Party are going to do it. When Theresa May was the Prime Minister, I think she was talking about it as well. She was into this sort of thing as well. Just the Conservative Party have been like the Labour Party. In the last few years, the Conservative Party have become slightly more conservative. But when Ruth Davidson, Theresa May, Boris Johnson, they were right into this stuff as much as the Labour Party. But with the Labour government coming in, this is going to happen. And as I say, so if you're a white male, for example, you'll know that the dice are stacked against you at every turn. And if you're, for example, a black woman and you get promoted, the thought will maybe go through your mind, was this just to try and close the gaps? Was this just to get the statistics lined up? Did they really think I was the best person for the job? Have they just made up a job to give me just so it looks better? I mean, that will be the thought that will go through people's heads. And in terms of, say, the wage gap, I say, don't assume that white people earn the most either. That is not the case in Britain. There's some other racial groups that earn the most. but the whole thing is seriously misguided, divisive, and destructive. It's going to stir up, let's say, racial tension on a pretty grand scale. Because story after story will come through of people who have been discriminated against. Because they're trying to make it fair for groups. They're making it fair for groups. You make it unfair for individuals. So you'll get someone, let's say the black child of some superstar or business, an entrepreneur, millionaire, hugely wealthy, and their kid might go and work for a company, and the company might be thinking, oh, we need to promote that kid because we've got to get more black people earning more. Whereas there might be some white kid from a very difficult background, but he's in the white group, so no, we don't want to promote him because that's going to make our figures worse. So it's just totally unfair. As soon as you try and treat groups as groups, then you're unfair to individuals. It's as simple as that. So yeah, tempting. And I think young men in particular, the more of this they experience, the more embittered they will become. And you've got to understand it. You've got to understand that that's the way it is. And again, with the race thing as well, the more it goes on, the more embittered people will become. But if you're young and ambitious and you can see the possibilities ahead of you, but if it gradually dawns on you that, no, you're just the wrong sort of person. It's someone with some other characteristics who's going to be promoted, well, it'll be pretty fed up, and quite rightly. But unfortunately, I'd say that's going to come in on a huge scale with the Labour Party. Right, and the Conservatives, as you can see, the Conservatives are hardly going to be opposing that as well. Right, something else from the Labour Manifesto that is a seriously bad idea is they want to give more rights to cohabiting couples. Now, as a family party, we're pro-marriage. The institution of marriage is very important. So the idea of marriage is that a couple commit to each other publicly, a legal bond, and then that's the foundation of their stable, committed relationship going forward, and then that provides the ideal context for children and their upbringing. So that's the idea of marriage. The commitment and the legal rights go together. So it encourages people to make that commitment. But the Labour Party says basically they want to give some of the benefits of marriage to people who haven't got married. So eventually, the more rights you give to people who cohabit in terms of, say, inheritance or what happens when they split up, how does it work when they split up, the more of those rights you give to cohabiting couples, the less reason there is to get married. So the Labour Party is positively undermining the culture of marriage in Britain. Totally the opposite approach to the family party. Now, at this point, what does the Conservative Party do coming in? Well, they're just from nowhere in this. I mean, reform, would they be getting involved in this? Again, not really. Reform are not a socially conservative party. I think Nigel Farage is definitely not a social conservative. The Reform Party, when Nigel Farage was away from it, it has adopted a few socially conservative policies. But I say they're certainly not going to be the focus while Nigel Farage is the leader. Yeah, so Labour's plan there, and we were pro-marriage, they're anti-marriage. They want to make marriage unnecessary, indistinct, undifferentiated, and so it will undermine the culture of marriage. Yes, yeah. It is for Labour. It does show it's a real philosophical difference, isn't it? I read a book a while ago, and it was saying basically that marriage is unfair because the system, legal system, benefits, whatever, tax system, it discriminates against people who are not married, and that's not fair. It's all equality, and we don't want to discriminate. So instead of seeing marriage as a positive thing and the benefits associated with it being an incentive to do something that's good for society, they see it as a negative because anything that's not offered to people who are not married is discriminatory. Now, we would, of course, say, okay, if you want the benefits of marriage, then get married. That's how about that as a possibility? But they wouldn't be dreaming of that. Oh, stand the election, of course we are. We have 16 candidates around Scotland. I wish we had more because we've got so many people saying, "Oh, I wish we had a candidate here. I wish I could vote for you." So we would have liked to have more, but our budget stretched to about 16. But we'll try and have as many candidates as we can any elections in the future. Now, you all know what I'm going to say next, don't you? I'm going to say, if you haven't got a candidate in your area, then next time it could be you. Vote for yourself. So get in touch with us. You could join in with our candidate training after the summer. When I say candidate training, it's partly training. It's partly to give you a chance to explore the possibility to see if it's for you. But do come along and see, and it could be a whole new chapter in your life. Your first Scottish family party if you're in Scotland. Right, excellent. Do move. Okay, there's plenty of houses here. It's a very nice part of the world. Do come and join us over here. Right, I was at a Chinese, Hong Kong church on Sunday afternoon in Edinburgh. Someone told me that there are 20 Chinese, Cantonese or Mandarin language churches in Edinburgh. 20. That's quite a lot, isn't it? There's quite a few African churches as well. Anyway, so I went along to a Hong Kong church to speak to them about some political issues. Well, it was a sermon, but it included some things about current political issues as well. And I was talking to a young couple afterwards, and they were saying that their child goes to one of the two small Christian schools in Edinburgh, Christian primary schools. But what's Labour going to do? Labour's going to put VAT on the fees. So they're saying this is going to be quite a strain. I'm not sure if they're going to be able to afford it. And for these little schools as well, this is going to be a major hit. I mean, these are not schools for wealthy people. These are schools for people who are very dissatisfied with the state system, want something a bit different, and are willing to try and get the money together just to pay the very low fees. So that's going to be a major hit to them. Now, the Labour Party, of course, why do they put VAT on school fees? Probably because they're class warriors. It's those rich people are getting an advantage, not equality. They're getting an unfair advantage. Well, that's part of what they're thinking. I think they're completely wrong in that. But quite a lot of people who choose independent schools, it's not because they're really wealthy and want to give their kids what they would see as a sort of unfair advantage. It's because they want different values. And these little Christian schools, I say, have got a very important role, and the Labour Party is happy to hammer those as well, because they don't like the idea of people not getting the state's values injected into them. It tends to be left-wing governments want to take over everything. They want to look after kids for as long as possible, as soon as possible, and right the way through the years. They want the school day to be as long as possible, and they want them within the state's authority. They want the state's message to be presenting to children. So that's the other part of the reason why they don't like independent schools. The clue's in the name. Independent. Generally, people on the left of politics, they're not so keen on independence. That they like everyone just receiving what the state's got to benevolently bestow upon them. So the VAT on school fees is going to have a very detrimental effect on a lot of families in Scotland, and not just people who are paying relatively high fees at traditional independent schools. There's a lot more to it than that. All right, to live in Durness. Oh, you can go and visit our friend Phil Tanzer. He lives up in Durness. I've been up there once. Very nice indeed. Right, what else have we got to talk about? On the election campaign, it's fascinating listening to it, isn't it? One thing we refrain from in the family party is making up numbers. Because it seems like the other parties, they're quite happy to say, yeah, we're going to spend an extra 12.6 billion pounds, and that'll get us an extra 32,296 nurses. I mean, nobody really believes these figures. No one believes that the money's just there to spend. No one believes that you can sort of calculate what you're going to do. I mean, anyone with any sense as well wouldn't believe that these sort of crude promises are actually the way to improve something really complex like the health system. So what's it called? The Institute of Financial Studies, is that what it's called? They've said the Labour and the Conservative manifestos are basically fantasy. I mean, they're spending money they haven't got. They're not facing the facts that they've either got to cut spending, raise taxes, or borrow more. And none of those options is palatable at all, but they won't face up to the facts. They're saying like the Reform Manifesto is even worse. But the family party, what we do is we don't go into that. We don't go into making all these numerical pledges. We say, these are our values. This is what we're aiming for. This is the direction we're trying to go in. And we think that's a lot more honest with the electorate. I've been mulling over whether or not it would be a good idea to have some sort of body that monitors manifestos once a party comes into government. If you Institute for Fiscal Studies, yeah, because if you promise things in your manifesto and don't do them, there should be a penalty for that. You should, I don't know, lose some MPs or something. I don't know how it should work. I think I was saying this the other week, but there should be some system to stop that happening, to stop this like crazy market of unfulfillable promises. I mean, another interesting thing in the campaign, there's been a lot of talk about the small boats coming over the channel. I mean, Labour as well. Labour's talking about it as tough as the Conservatives. Do you believe either of them to do anything about it? I think obviously not, because I mean the Conservatives haven't done what's necessary, but Labour really want to. Labour talks about immigration a lot during elections, but then the normal run of things, are they going to be cutting immigration or dealing with illegal immigration? Then I think that is extremely unlikely. Would reform get a grip of it? Very possibly. They leave the European human rights restrictions that currently make it difficult to deal with this problem. So that is, that's been quite an emphasis on that issue. But I think with the whole immigration thing, as I was saying earlier, there's got to be the other side of the coin there as well. It's where are people going to come from? Where's our population going to come from? So it's got to be a two-pronged policy. If you want to cut down cut down immigration, then there's got to be very, very, very dramatic increase in fertility. Because if population declines, it just creates appalling problems. Because our society is structured on the basis that people who are working pay for people who are retired, which is a ridiculous system we've got into. Because people who are paying in, that money should be invested and it should be ready to then use for their retirement. But our government, in their sort of anti-wisdom over decades, has not done that. They don't take the money that people pay in and save it ready to use for that generation when they're retired, because then you'd have that proportionate amount. They don't do that. They just spend it immediately. So they're always relying on a big enough working population. So if your population is declining dramatically, I mean, there's no plan to keep the public services going. So calamitous problems on the horizon if that problem isn't sorted out. Yes, in Hungary, women who have 4 children never have to pay any tax ever again. Yeah, but I think that's a sliding scale, isn't it? If you have 3 children, then you only have to pay 25% of tax. So it's a sliding scale as well. Now, if that was proposed in Britain, that's not our policy, but we're on that sort of wavelength. The first thing people would say is they'd say it's sexist because it's for women and not for men. Right? Would I have a problem with that? Not really. Not particularly. I think the role of women as mothers is unique, and recognizing it uniquely and honoring it in that way, then I think that's fair enough. But I'd say if anyone tried to introduce that in Britain, people would be or would they be up in arms? That's a genuine question. What do you think? How would that go? Would people say, oh, it's fine because it's discriminating in favor of women? Or would people say, no, that's really bad, it's sexist because it's assuming that it's rewarding women for having children? Why should it just reward women for having children? So I don't know. What do you think? Would that be popular or unpopular with the sort of progressive feminists in our culture? I don't know. I think it would tend to be unpopular. I think they wouldn't like that. They want a system where, women are rewarded for doing other things rather than having children. It only applies to married women, does it? Okay, I wasn't aware of that, but absolutely. And in Hungary, I think they probably don't have same-sex marriage, do they? I'm not sure if they do or not. That's an interesting point for reform. Reform have got a policy to slightly increase the amount of transferable tax allowance. Our policy is just total transferable tax allowance. Particularly when families have got children. Reform's policies have a bit more transferable tax allowance. But Reform's policy, does that apply to gay and lesbian couples as well then? I assume it does, because they're not challenging the definition of marriage. So they're saying this is to encourage people to have more children, and yet it would also apply to people in same-sex marriages. So the Reform Party seems to be encouraging same-sex couples to have more children. which I've got quite a problem with. I think that's counterproductive. Children need the mum and the dad, ideally. So I think that's a bad thing for the children. I mean, the same-sex couples might think it's great, but the children deprived of mother and father would not. So I think that's an interesting question to ask someone from Reform one day. Yes, it is a good idea. With tax generally, there's a bit of flexibility, isn't there, of how you arrange your tax affairs. So I'm sure it does benefit. So Betty, would it benefit Muslims? Yes, it probably would, wouldn't it? But that's an interesting question with regard to fertility. In Britain, basically, the highest fertility rates tend to be among more recent immigrant communities. So, yeah, that's going to adjust the demographic balance of the society, but that's a whole other issue. Reform has defects for sure. Drugs is another weak spot, and that's interesting. Isn't there a drugs policy like life imprisonment for drug dealers, which is a bit odd because Nigel Farage in the past has been for decriminalising drugs, decriminalisation, and so life sentence for drug dealing. I mean, life sentence for drug dealing. To be honest, I'm all for being very hard on drug dealers, but life sentence for like a schoolboy selling a bit of cannabis to a few classmates, I think that policy needs a bit more nuance. I'm sure they would say, well, he doesn't count as a drug dealer, but I would say, well, what he is doing is dealing drugs. So I'm not sure that policy is quite thought through. So Mr. Jupiter, I'd be interested to know which way you think it's a weak spot for them, because it seems like they're very hard on drugs, which I'm sort of in favour of, but it doesn't seem particularly thought out, the policy that they've got there. So yeah, if you could clarify what you meant, that would be interesting. Just on the drug issue, the SNP manifesto has also got decriminalisation of drugs in it. The SNP's manifesto, decriminalisation of drugs. Again, that should be massively controversial. I mean, drugs cause absolute mayhem and appalling, particularly in Scotland. I mean, appalling damage. And yet the SNP manifesto is saying they're going to decriminalise. Now, obviously, simple logic tells you if you make something legal, more people will do it. If you make something illegal, less people will do it, assuming the law is applied in any sort of sense. So the SNP seems to be happy to have more people taking drugs because their attitude is it's okay for more people to take drugs as long as they take them in our safe consumption caravans that we'll put around in the street. And the other, I've mentioned this before, the Scottish government produced a report about the problem of drug abuse in Scotland, and it said the heart of the problem was stigma. That's what we really need to deal with. The problem is stigma. People who have a bad attitude to drug abuse or drug addicts. And if we could just get rid of that, then the problem of drug abuse would disappear. So it's not the fact that these chemicals are poisonous and addictive and wreck people's lives. It's not the drugs that are the problem. It's the rest of society having a bad attitude to them. It's absolute fantasy world, ideological madness. But that's the Scottish government. Why is there such a big drugs problem in Scotland? That's an interesting question. I think it's partly because the policing has been very lax. So there's two aspects with a law. There's what the letter of the law is, and there's whether or not anyone bothers applying it. I've discovered that in a few issues, in some ways personally as well. There's a law's no good if the police are not interested in applying it. And I think that's the case in Scotland to a significant degree. I think generally social problems in Scotland are severe. The level of sort of family dysfunction, poverty, addictions, mental health problems. I think there's sort of array of social problems. There is a particular concentration of them in Scotland. It's probably similar in some big cities in England, but on average, let's say Scotland seems to come out with more serious problems. I seem to want to decriminalise cannabis. I wasn't aware of that. Yeah, I'd be interested to see more information about that. That would be interesting. Now, that's interesting because probably the SNP is concerned. They want alcohol to be more and more expensive, so that they're quite so anti-alcohol and they're very much anti-smoking. When it comes to the drugs that are the most dangerous and doing the most harm, then they're very liberal on that front, which is very, very odd. The explanation I heard about that a few years ago was that smoking's seen as something that old people do. So it's not trendy. So you can be really hard on that. Oh, smoking is really stupid. So we can just stamp that out and make it illegal. And that's the way to deal with it. Whereas drugs, well, that's what the cool and trendy people do. So obviously, it's the stigma that's the real issue there. Maybe that's not the right explanation, but I don't know what is the explanation then, if that is not it. Right. Couple of things to finish. We've had quite a few Scottish Family Party candidates in hustings, taking part in hustings around the country. And it seems a standard question in every hustings is Palestine, Israel-Gaza conflict. And I think this is quite concerning because there are lots of conflicts around the world, and very serious ones as well. And there always have been, and there always will be. But it seems like this one is singled out for unique treatment. And it concerns me that that's the case. Because I don't think there's not an explanation in terms of being concerned about the impact of war on countries, communities, nations, whatever. If the concern was the impact of war on civilians and children, then there will be a whole array of conflicts that would have had similar prominence in our political debate, and they should play a part. I mean, foreign policy is important, aid, etc. Possibility of intervening, trying to influence nations. Okay, that's all very valid. But if the standard of judgment being used is where are there civilians and children, whatever, suffering, then it shouldn't be the case that the Palestine-Israel conflict is like a big issue at every single hustings you go to, and the other issues don't get a look in. So there is some other factor that makes this conflict front and centre in Scottish politics. We could speculate about about what that is. I guess my point for tonight can just be that there are other factors apart from the suffering inflicted on civilians that are causing this to be so prominent. I think it's it's quite concerning. You can have a range of opinions about the Palestine-Israel, the Gaza-Israel conflict, a range of opinions, but just the fact that it is given so much emphasis. I mean, have you seen what's going on in Sudan at the moment? I mean, massive scale displacement population. I mean, just absolutely appalling things going on, but it just doesn't seem to register. Yeah, right, as Roberts chipped in as well, as I was saying. Yeah, the Sudan conflict, really, really appalling. The Sudan conflict, I won't go into that, but I think I've made my points. Right, Hamish, the Glasgow effect. Generational poverty, reduced life expectancy is a well-known and much-studied chronic phenomenon. Yes, many things combine to that, don't they? I mean, poor diet, alcohol and tobacco, overuse, housing, maybe various. I think the thing that sometimes gets neglected in this study is culture as well. You can have a culture that can produce ill health, that mitigates against living a fulfilling, healthy, organized, structured life as well. So, the Glasgow effect is very significant. Christians attacked in northern Nigeria. We don't hear much about that. Correct. I mean, the things going on in Nigeria have been appalling. That's been going on for quite some years. It has been reported at some points, but as I say, relatively underreported. There'll be huge numbers of Christians. Basically, the routine situation is that Christians in Muslim majority countries are persecuted. In general, that tends to be the case, to different degrees in different countries, but that is the general pattern, and that tends to be underreported. There are places where Muslims are persecuted as well. I know this happened in India, and there's other places. So it's always a mixed picture. I mean, there's good and bad from each side. And the danger for Christians is to focus on all the issues where the Christians are the goodies and the other people are the baddies. And then the danger for Muslims is to always focus on the situations where the Muslims are in the right and the other people are in the wrong. Or even worse, is to assume that because they're Muslims, they must be in the right, because that's our tribe. Or for Christians to think, okay, they're the Christians, so I'm on their side. I don't care about the rights and wrongs of the conflict. I'm on their side. I think that's a very dangerous mentality, and we have to rise above that. There are Christians in Gaza, yes, indeed there are, and there are some in Israel as well. It's interesting, around the Middle East, a lot of the nations there, they used to have significant Christian populations and significant Jewish populations as well. But the other countries that are in the Middle East, basically the Jewish populations have disappeared, mainly because they moved to Israel, partly because maybe they wanted to, partly because there were problems where they were as well. Right, the last thing I wanted to say tonight was to mention quite an important thing. I think sometimes there's an error it's possible to make in politics. It needs a name, and the error is to always focus on the next thing coming. So, right, what bills are in the Parliament? What's in the election manifestos? That's what this election is all about. That's what politics is about at the moment. So, in Scotland, if you're looking at things from a socially conservative point of view, right, assisted suicide in the Parliament, right, big issue. Conversion therapy ban. Buffer zones, etc. So there's always something that's wrong going through the Parliament. And every election, you can see what's coming up as well. You can see what's next down the line. And the temptation is to look at politics in terms of, right, what's the current thing? What's the next bad thing that's coming? Or what's the next good thing we're trying to achieve? But I think sometimes it's really important to say, well, actually, the biggest issue isn't something that's been talked about now, because it's something that was decided that was wrong a long time ago, and it's never been put right. And that's still the main issue. So, you know where I'm going next. So obviously, if you think about the issue of abortion, 1967, the law was introduced that was just totally wrong. That allowed the killing of unborn children, and it's resulting now, it's happening on a massive scale. So really appalling evil taking place. But I fear that for a substantial number of people, it doesn't get the attention it deserves, because it's not seen as a current political issue. It's not being debated in the Parliament at the moment. It's not something in anyone's manifesto at the moment. But I think in politics, if you're operating from principles, it's really important sometimes to say, well, that might be what they're talking about at the moment, but we need to go back and fix that. We've got to go back and put right some of the bad decisions. I think otherwise, what social conservatives do is they're just conserving what the progressives passed 10 years ago. Sometimes you've got to go back and fix things. They're not controversy anymore, but we need to go back and they need to be fixed. Right. Thank you very much for watching this evening. I've enjoyed your comments and interaction. Thanks if you're watching later on as well. Now, next Tuesday, we'll definitely have an election special live stream as well. We might have one before then as well. We shall see. In the meantime, if you haven't watched our party election broadcast, go over to our social media and have a look at that. And thanks for watching. Good night.